The storms of Voron 9 whispered like dying machines, their echoes slicing through the empty plains. A pallid light shimmered on the horizon, not from a sun, there was no sun here, but from the reflected glow of a wandering nebula that painted the sky in fractured color. Kale moved through the wasteland with a slow, practiced caution, his breath fogging the inside of his cracked helmet. The air was thick with metallic dust and electromagnetic static. Every few seconds, his visor flickered with interference, painting brief ghosts of movement that vanished as soon as he turned his head. His boots sank into the violet sand, each step releasing a faint hiss as buried mineral pockets reacted to oxygen. The suit's servos whined, low and tired, and Kale muttered to it as though to an old friend. "Just a few more clicks," he said. The suit didn't respond. It never did. He'd shut down its AI weeks ago, tired of the endless survival reports and probability estimates. On Voron 9, numbers didn't matter. Only instinct did. He stopped beside a jagged outcropping and raised his wrist display. A weak beacon pulsed far to the east, an old mining relay, perhaps. His rations were nearly gone, his oxygen cells low. The smart choice was to follow the signal, scavenge what he could, and leave this dead world before its storms tore him apart. But then, Kale had never been known for making the smart choice. The wind shifted, carrying with it a sound that didn't belong. Faint, almost swallowed by the static, the echo of a voice. He froze, hand resting on the grip of his sidearm. Voices didn't exist here. The last colony had vanished centuries ago, and only the bones of their machines remained, humming in the gravity tides. Yet there it was again, high, trembling, foreign. His translator implant scrambled to make sense of it, catching fragments of syllables, none human. He switched on his external lights, the beam slicing through dust until it struck movement. A figure, small and unsteady, struggling through the storm. Kale raised his weapon out of habit, then lowered it when he saw the shape more clearly. It wasn't human. The creature, no, the child, had skin that shimmered faintly, like oil on water, and large eyes that glowed faintly from within. She stumbled toward him, her voice rising, panicked. The translator caught the meaning this time, fragile but clear. "Please, human, help. My mom is trapped, in the Sky Hunter's nest." Kale blinked, certain he'd misheard. "Repeat," he said. The implant relayed her words again, matching tone and urgency. The child's thin limbs trembled, she was half-starved, her clothes torn from exposure. She was no taller than his waist. A child on this planet? Impossible. Yet she looked at him with something fierce in her eyes, hope, the most dangerous thing in the universe. He knelt to her level, keeping his movements slow. "You're alone?" he asked. She shook her head violently, pointing toward the distant canyons. Her gestures were quick, desperate. The translator filled in fragments, mother, danger, high above, creatures of the storm. Kale's gaze followed the line of her shaking hand. There, beyond the rising dust, the cliffs loomed, vast pillars of obsidian and metal, glowing faintly with electric veins that danced across their faces. Above them, strange silhouettes circled, winged shapes, their outlines jagged against the nebula's light. Sky Hunters. He had heard of such things in passing, a predator species evolved in gravitic anomalies, feeding on plasma currents and flesh alike. He didn't know if the stories were true, but this planet had a way of making myths real. He looked back to the girl. "Your mother's up there." She nodded, tears mixing with the dust on her cheeks. Kale exhaled slowly. Every part of him wanted to walk away. The climb alone could kill a seasoned explorer, the storms could crush metal and bone alike. Yet something in the child's trembling voice cut through the layers of weariness that had built inside him since he'd left Earth. He'd seen too much death to add another. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sira," she said softly. "All right, Sira." He rose, adjusting the magnetic clamps on his gloves. "Show me where." They walked in silence for a time, the wind howling between them. Syrah's steps were light, almost floating. Her species must have adapted to the planet's shifting gravity. Kale's boots left deep prints behind him, heavy and certain. As they neared the canyon, the landscape began to warp subtly. Pebbles hung in the air for seconds before falling. The ground trembled with invisible tides. Kale's instruments blinked red, warning of gravitational shear. "Stay close," he said, pulling Syrah behind him. The canyon yawned ahead, a scar that seemed to split reality itself. Within its depths, rivers of molten light flowed upward instead of down. Above, the sky hunters wheeled, their metallic feathers glinting like blades. Kale crouched, scanning the terrain. The cliffs were nearly vertical, but patches of debris, old scaffolding, fragments of alien structures, formed a jagged path. It wasn't much, but it was something. He looked at Syrah again. "If I go up there, you stay here. You understand?" Her eyes widened in panic. "No. They come when the wind screams. I hide. I wait." He didn't argue. The logic was sound. "Then find cover," he said, nodding toward a hollow beneath a fallen arch. "I'll bring her back." She stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to measure the truth of his words. Then she whispered, "You're not afraid?" Kale almost laughed. "Fear keeps you alive. But sometimes, it keeps others dead." He turned toward the cliff, activating his exosuit's climbing rig. The anchors hissed, locking into place. Behind him, Syrah watched, her luminous eyes reflecting the fractured sky. As Kale took his first step up the wall, the wind began to shift again. Low and resonant, carrying the sound of wings slicing through the air. He didn't look back. Above, the storm began to awaken. Kale's boots gripped the cliff's jagged surface as the wind tore around him, whipping dust and shards of metallic rock against his armor. Each movement required careful calculation, though instinct guided him as much as the exosuit servos. The cliff itself seemed alive, a twisting lattice of obsidian veins and fossilized alien machinery, remnants of civilizations that had once attempted to tame Voron 9's gravity storms. Sparks erupted where his climbing anchors bit into metal, the sound drowned almost instantly by the howling wind that carried distant screams of winged predators. Syrah watched from below, hidden beneath the arch's shadow, her small hands pressed against the rough stone. She could hear Kale's labored breathing even through the roaring wind. Every now and then, a fragment of the cliff above her would tremble and shudder, sending cascading rocks down the face of the canyon. She flinched with each impact but didn't move, eyes locked on Kale as he climbed. The child species had evolved for low-gravity flight, but even their enhanced reflexes couldn't have survived this ascent. Only the human, alien to the physics of this world yet hardened by his own death world, could reach her mother. Kale reached a narrow ledge, crouching for a moment to catch his breath. The cliff here warped strangely, a distortion in the gravitational field that made the ledge feel like it was sloping backward. His suit's sensors flickered, reporting negative gravity currents, localized anomalies that could shift at any second. He pressed a hand to the wall, feeling vibrations that suggested something moving above. The sky hunters were near. He moved forward again, shifting his weight with precision. The creatures were like nothing terrestrial, their metallic wings reflecting the fractured nebula light as they circled the upper cliffs. Kale could see their size now, far larger than any terrestrial bird, their bodies armored with a composite of chitin and starship scrap, their talons capable of tearing through reinforced exosuits. They hunted in patterns dictated by both instinct and intelligence, circling in arcs that allowed them to anticipate prey movements even in the chaotic gravitic fields. Kale adjusted his visor to track them, small markers appearing in his HUD as he estimated their trajectories. He couldn't outrun them, he could only outthink them. The climb ahead was narrow, a twisting path of fractured scaffolding from an ancient mining installation, half consumed by rockfall and plasma corrosion. One misstep, and gravity wouldn't be the only thing to tear him from the cliff face. As he ascended, Kale began to catch fragments of the canyon's whispers, the resonance of old technology buried in stone, the faint hum of ancient gravitic engines that had once powered transport rails. The Vorans had tried to manipulate gravity here centuries ago, leaving the canyon unstable. Now, those fields flickered unpredictably, creating zones where weight could vanish or double with a single step. He felt his feet lift unexpectedly as the first pocket of anti-gravity swallowed him. His servos compensated instantly, but the effort left his muscles screaming, suit systems overheating. Halfway along the path, a panel of crystalline metal jutting from the cliff face glimmered, reacting to his presence. Kale tapped it lightly with a glove, and a faint holographic pattern flickered to life, projecting a map of the canyon etched in luminescent blue lines. The display pulsed, showing areas of extreme gravity flux, zones where plasma currents surged like rivers, and the nests of the predators above. Kale studied it carefully. The path to the nest wasn't direct, it wound precariously along shifting ledges and fragile scaffolding. A single miscalculation, and he'd plummet. He moved again, slower this time, testing each step before committing. The sky hunters screamed, their voices carrying a resonance that vibrated through the stone. One of them veered closer, wings slicing the air with a sound that made Kale's teeth rattle. He froze, then pivoted, clinging to the cliff's edge as the predator banked in the shifting gravity, talons snapping inches from his helmet. It circled again, then veered upward, drawn to a different disturbance in the canyon. He exhaled, though he didn't relax. The creatures were clever, tracking him through both sight and the subtle distortions of the gravitic currents he left in his wake. A sudden flash of bioluminescent light caught his attention. Cirrus species, he realized, emitted faint radiation in low-energy spectra. Her presence below had been subtly influencing the readings of his suit's sensors. He glanced down, catching a brief glimpse of her small form, frozen yet tense, shielding herself behind the rocks. She was watching, learning. Kale's chest tightened. The child was strong, stronger than she realized, but the canyon would test even the toughest of instincts. The climb resumed, more treacherous than before. Kale had to leap between fractured ledges, grappling hooks biting into alien stone that pulsed under his touch. Gravity fluxes tugged him sideways, forcing him to adjust mid-air, sometimes inverting his orientation completely before landing on a precarious shelf. Sparks flew from the exosuit as servos strained to counter the stress, but Kale's body moved with a rhythm honed from a lifetime on hostile worlds. Every breath, every motion, was precise. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes, time stretched in Voron 9's unstable fields. Kale paused again, feeling the canyon twist beneath him. The cliff itself seemed alive, breathing and shifting, as if it sensed the intruder. Above, the faint outline of the Sky Hunter nest became visible, a jagged fortress of metal, bone, and plasma webbing, swaying with the turbulence of the upper winds. From this distance, he could see the faint glow of someone trapped within, an unmistakable pulse of bioluminescence trapped in filaments. He swallowed, feeling the first real surge of fear since landing. The climb was nearly complete, but the nest and its predators were no longer abstract threats, they were real, tangible, and close. He adjusted his wrist-mounted tether launcher, preparing for the final stretch, his eyes scanning for the plasma threads that bound the captive. Below, Syrah whispered to herself, words carried by the wind, prayers, hopes, instructions. Kale didn't understand her language, but he understood the meaning. Her mother's life was his responsibility now. The canyon seemed to pulse with energy, every gravitic distortion a challenge, every gust of wind a test. Kale inhaled, steadying himself. One more stretch, one more leap, and he would be among the Sky Hunters, confronting a predator species evolved to dominate worlds like this one. His heartbeat thrummed in time with the resonance of the cliff, the storm, and the distant nebulae. Above, the nest waited, and he moved toward it with deliberate precision, a human born of death worlds climbing a canyon that refused to let him pass. Kale paused on a narrow ledge, the wind from above tearing at his armor and rattling his helmet, carrying the metallic cries of the Sky Hunters as they patrolled the upper strata. The nest pulsed faintly ahead, a fortress of jagged metal and plasma filaments that seemed alive, as if the predators themselves had woven it from the remains of long-forgotten spacecraft and the bones of previous victims. Gravity currents shifted under his feet, pulling him slightly toward the cliff face before releasing him in sudden bursts. His servos groaned, overclocking to compensate, but Kale's focus never wavered. He had come too far to falter now. As he moved forward, he noticed small artifacts embedded in the cliff, crystalline panels etched with luminescent symbols, humming softly. These were remnants of the Vorans, an ancient civilization that had attempted to harness the planet's gravity anomalies centuries ago. Kale crouched, brushing a gloved hand over one panel. Holographic lines flickered to life, mapping the canyon in 3 dimensions, highlighting zones of extreme gravitational flux and marking areas that had been structurally reinforced, or destabilized, by Voran experiments. The nest itself sat atop one of these unstable pockets, anchored precariously by fractured beams and hanging metal strands. Any misstep could trigger a collapse. He moved cautiously, using the projections to plan each leap and handhold. The wind screamed around him, and a sky hunter swooped low, its metallic wings slicing through the haze like knives. Kale froze, pressed to the cliff, feeling the creature's shadow pass inches above his helmet. Its eyes glowed like molten metal, intelligent and calculating, watching him not just as prey but as an intruder in a territory it understood completely. He exhaled slowly, timing the next movement as the creature ascended, lured by some disturbance farther along the cliff. Kale's suit sensors began to pick up faint energy readings from the nest itself. The plasma threads that bound the captive glowed in patterns he had never seen, bioluminescence synchronized with electrical pulses. The energy was alive, responsive to motion and sound, almost as if the nest could think. The thought made Kale's pulse quicken. It was one thing to face predators, another entirely to confront a semi-sentient trap. He adjusted his tether launcher, checking the magnetic anchors before continuing. Every motion had to be precise, one misfire, and the nest could collapse, or worse, react violently. As he ascended, Kale caught movement beside a fractured obelisk, a small predator, juvenile by its size, nearly invisible in the swirling dust. Its metallic feathers reflected fragments of nebula light, and it hissed a warning, a high-frequency vibration that sent shivers through the cliff. Kale paused, weighing options. The creature was fast, agile, and likely able to alert the nest. He activated the microshock module in his exosuit's gauntlet, sending a controlled pulse through the ledge. The juvenile yelped and leapt, scattering fragments of rock, giving him a clear path. Higher now, Kale reached a plateau where the gravity seemed to flicker unpredictably. One misstep could send him spiraling into the canyon below. He crawled along the ledge, hands gripping exposed metal beams fused with stone. The nest loomed directly above, pulsating with plasma light and the trapped form of the Lethari mother. Kale could see her bioluminescent veins dim and flare, a silent rhythm that marked the passing of fear and hope. He swallowed, steeling himself for the final approach. A sudden tremor ran through the cliff, caused by a localized gravity surge. Sparks flew from his anchors, and Kale was forced to suspend himself horizontally across a narrow chasm, arms straining as his servos screamed in protest. From above, the sky hunters screamed in unison, the sound a mixture of rage and curiosity. Kale felt the air shift violently as one swooped down, wings creating a shockwave that sent him swinging precariously. He kicked off the cliff face, flipping midair, and fired a tether into a sturdy beam across the gap. The anchor held, and he pulled himself up, landing with a grunt. Closer now, Kale could see the intricacy of the nest. Plasma filaments twisted like living threads, binding the mother in a web that reacted to every movement, tightening or releasing based on subtle vibrations. The nest itself seemed to hover slightly, held aloft by localized gravity anomalies. Any disturbance could trigger collapse or trigger defensive mechanisms built into the nest by the sky hunter's evolution. Kale's mind raced, calculating each move, each pulse of energy, each step in relation to the next. He adjusted his visor to highlight energy densities, mapping the threads in 3 dimensions before attempting an approach. Syrah's voice, carried faintly on the wind below, murmured prayers in her alien tongue. Kale didn't understand the words, but the emotion was clear: fear, hope, desperation. He reached for the first filament, gauging its tension. The plasma sizzled under his glove, but his suit's shielding held. Slowly, he began to work, cutting strands with precise bursts of electromagnetic energy. A sky hunter shrieked from above, wings slicing the air as it adjusted its orbit around the nest. Kale paused, holding his breath as the creature hovered, considering him. Seconds stretched into minutes. The predator seemed to analyze him, then banked away, choosing to investigate a disturbance on the far side of the cliff. Kale continued, each filament he cut releasing tension and sparks, sending arcs of light into the swirling air. The mother's eyes opened, bioluminescence pulsing weakly as she realized rescue had arrived. Kale adjusted his stance, careful not to trigger any sudden movements that could destabilize the nest. Sweat mingled with dust inside his helmet, his muscles straining against the unpredictable gravity, but he moved with controlled precision, inching closer to the captive. Finally, he reached the last of the plasma threads. With a measured strike, the mother was free, her wings quivering as they extended into the turbulent air. Kale grabbed her arm, steadying both of them against a sudden spike in gravity that made the platform dip dangerously. Together, they began the careful descent, every step calculated, every moment a battle against both the environment and the predators circling above. Syrah's distant voice cheered, carried by the wind, as father and child, two species, two worlds, worked together in silence, moving through the storm, toward a narrow hope that hung precariously over the abyss. The canyon around them pulsed with energy, alive in ways that no human technology could predict, yet Kale moved as if he understood it. Every flicker of light, every pulse of gravitic distortion, every wing beat above was part of a rhythm he had learned to follow. Inch by inch, step by step, he guided the mother through the deadly lattice of plasma and stone, each movement a testament to instincts forged on worlds meant to kill, and to the quiet determination of a human who would not fail a child's desperate plea. The air thinned as Kale and the Lethari mother, Aura, reached the uppermost strata of the canyon, where the nebulous fractured light streaked across the sky in harsh, jagged colors. The plasma currents swirled violently here, feeding off the localized gravity anomalies, and each breath carried a metallic tang that made Kale's throat burn. Above them, the sky hunters patrolled the winds, their wings catching arcs of energy that made their silhouettes shimmer like living blades. The nest itself loomed above, a grotesque lattice of twisted metal, bone, and energized filaments, suspended in a precarious dance of gravitational tension. Kale paused on a narrow ledge, gripping the cliff as the turbulence shifted beneath him. Each footfall required precise calculation, one misstep could send them spiraling into the abyss below. He scanned the nest, estimating the angles of approach and the tension points of the plasma threads that bound Aura. The threads pulsed with a strange intelligence, responsive to motion, sound, and even electromagnetic interference. One false move, and the structure could collapse, taking predator and prey alike into the canyon's depths. Aura whispered faintly, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and hope. Kale caught fragments of her language through the translator implant, a soft cadence that resonated with the bioelectric rhythm of the nest. She instructed him on the angles of the plasma bindings, which strands were anchored in bone and which in the twisted metal shards scavenged from starship debris. Kale nodded, committing every detail to memory, each thread a potential hazard that could trigger both the predators and the unstable gravity fields. A sudden cry pierced the turbulent air. One of the sky hunters swooped low, metallic wings slicing the plasma haze. Kale flattened against the cliff face, feeling the shockwave roll through his armor. Sparks erupted where the wingtip grazed his servos. The predator banked, scanning for movement, and then circled back, wings vibrating with precision. Its intelligence was unnerving. It calculated trajectories with a speed that rivaled Kale's own instincts, adjusting to every subtle shift in gravity and every minute movement in the nest. Kale exhaled slowly, timing his approach. He activated a microfield generator on his gauntlet, a pulse of electromagnetic energy designed to temporarily destabilize the plasma threads just enough to allow passage without collapsing the nest. The energy arced across the first filament, sizzling, and Kale moved in, cutting precise strands with controlled bursts. Sparks of ionized air flared, illuminating the mother's tense form. Her wings twitched instinctively, bioluminescent veins flaring as she followed his rhythm, trusting him entirely despite the alien chaos around them. The sky hunter above screamed, a high-frequency shriek that made the plasma threads vibrate in response. Kale froze, holding his breath as the creature hovered, tilting its body to study him. Seconds stretched into an eternity. The predator banked, wings slicing arcs of light across the nest, and then veered away, drawn to some distant disturbance. Kale allowed himself a momentary exhale, though he knew the danger had not passed. The nest was alive in ways the predators themselves could not control. It was as much a trap as a home. Kale reached the core of the nest. Plasma threads coiled tightly around Aura's form, their energy pulsing in sync with her weakened heartbeat. The nest seemed to resist his intrusion, a subtle vibration under his gloves that suggested awareness. He placed one hand on her arm, feeling the tremor of fear and hope intermingled. Carefully, he used a combination of microcutters and electromagnetic pulses to release the final restraints. Each thread hissed and flared, and the nest responded, tilting slightly, testing their balance. Kale adjusted, bracing himself against the warped metal and fractured bone that formed the platform. Aura's wings unfurled tentatively, brushing against the plasma threads without triggering collapse. The bioluminescence in her veins flared brighter, a signal of life and recognition. She whispered something to Kale, words carried on a frequency he could barely interpret, yet the meaning was unmistakable: trust, survival, and gratitude. Kale nodded, his focus unbroken. Together, they began the careful descent, each step measured against the instability of the nest and the unpredictable pull of gravity currents. A sudden jolt tore through the cliff, a localized gravity spike that sent debris spiraling into the abyss. Kale braced Aura against him, using his own body to counteract the pull. Sparks flew from the exosuit as servos strained to maintain position. Above, a sky hunter dove, talons extended, aiming for the unstable edge of the nest. Kale fired a controlled pulse from his gauntlet, the electromagnetic energy arcing through the air, disrupting the creature's approach. The predator shrieked and veered away, narrowly missing the edge, wings slicing the plasma threads but not enough to collapse the nest. The descent continued, inch by precarious inch. Kale adjusted his tether anchors constantly, testing each surface for stability, feeling the subtle shifts in the gravity field. Aura clung to him, wings brushing against his armor, her body pulsing with faint bioluminescent signals that seemed to synchronize with the plasma currents. The nest itself groaned, a low, resonant hum that echoed through the canyon, as if aware of their intent to leave. Finally, Kale reached a wider ledge where the plasma threads no longer constrained Aura. She steadied herself, wings fully extended, scanning the turbulent air for threats. Kale crouched beside her, adjusting his armor and checking his servos. The wind howled, carrying the cries of distant sky hunters, but for the first time in hours, they were momentarily safe. Syrah's voice carried up from below, faint but urgent, her small hands waving as she prepared to guide them down to a more secure plateau. Kale looked up at the swirling nebula, the fractured light painting the canyon walls in jagged hues. The storm was far from over, the predators still hunting, and the canyon still alive with shifting energy, but for now, they had survived the nest itself. Kale exhaled, feeling the weight of exhaustion and relief in equal measure. His gaze swept across the turbulent skies, the shifting cliffs, and the precarious platforms they had traversed. Somewhere within the chaos of Voron 9, a legend was beginning to take shape, a human, Deathworld-born, who had faced the apex predators of a fractured planet and prevailed. Not for glory, but for the desperate plea of a child who refused to abandon hope. He shifted his grip, readying himself for the next phase of the descent, aware that the real test was far from over, yet knowing that step by step, breath by breath, they were moving closer to survival, and to the fragile promise of life in a world that had claimed countless others before them. The descent from the nest was far more treacherous than Kale had anticipated. The upper cliffs of Voron 9 pulsed with instability, every ledge alive with the tension of fractured gravity and plasma streams snaking unpredictably through the rock. Kale's exosuit groaned, servos screaming as he shifted his weight to counteract sudden surges. Aura clung to him tightly, wings partially extended to stabilize against gusts that threatened to tear them both from the ledge. Each movement was deliberate, calculated, and yet the canyon seemed determined to punish them for every step. A sudden vibration ran through the rock beneath their feet, a localized gravitic surge amplified by the remnants of foreign machinery embedded in the cliffs. Kale froze mid-step, gripping a jagged metallic beam, and felt the entire ledge tilt beneath him. Debris and loose fragments of rock spun upward in slow motion, suspended for a brief moment by the flux and gravity. He adjusted his servos instantly, rotating his body to counter the pull, but a spike of energy surged through the exosuit, sending a flare of sparks across his forearms. Aura hissed softly, a mixture of alarm and trust, and Kale tightened his hold, muttering reassurances that neither of them would hear. From above, a sky hunter screamed, wings vibrating with precision as it swooped toward them. Its talons cut through the plasma haze, and Kale saw the energy ripple in the threads of the nest still clinging to fragments of metal. He fired a pulse from his gauntlet, a controlled electromagnetic discharge designed to destabilize the creature's flight without collapsing the ledge, and the predator yelped, veering sharply to avoid the interference. Sparks arced through the turbulent air, illuminating the edges of the cliff in fractured, neon light. Kale continued the descent, one hand gripping the cliff, the other steadying Aura. He had to anticipate every fluctuation in the plasma currents, every micro-shift in gravity, every potential attack from above. The canyon was a living puzzle, and one misstep would be fatal. His breathing was shallow but steady, muscles taut and strained, mind calculating angles, weight, and timing in a continuous loop. He felt the surge of adrenaline and fear, but beneath it was a strange clarity, a heightened awareness honed by years surviving worlds designed to kill. Halfway down, the platform beneath them gave way. A hidden fracture, triggered by the disturbance of their movement, collapsed in a cascade of rock and metal. Kale reacted instinctively, planting a magnetic anchor in a protruding beam and swinging Aura against the cliff, narrowly avoiding a fall into the abyss. The plasma currents above flared violently, responding to the sudden release of energy. Sparks danced across the metal surfaces, and the sky hunters shrieked in frustration, circling to reassess their prey. Kale paused, heart hammering, chest pressed against Aura's. "Stay with me," he murmured, though the words were unnecessary. Her bioluminescence pulsed rhythmically, mirroring the tension in his own chest. He scanned the surrounding cliffs, identifying a more stable path, a twisted scaffold of foreign machinery that would carry them toward a narrow plateau below. It was the only viable route. He adjusted his harness, taking a calculated leap to latch onto the first support beam. The servos groaned but held, carrying their combined weight as he swung toward the scaffold. Above, one of the larger sky hunters dropped in a spiral, wings generating a shockwave that rattled the cliffs. Kale fired a second pulse, arcing energy through the air, and the predator screeched in fury, narrowly missing the edge where he had anchored. The canyon seemed to respond to every action, every pulse of energy, twisting and shifting in a chaotic dance. Yet Kale moved through it with precision, each step measured, each action deliberate, until finally, they reached the scaffold. The narrow plateau stretched ahead, a fractured patch of metal and stone stabilized by gravitational anomalies. Kale set Aura down carefully, checking her wings and pulse. She was weak, exhausted from hours of tension and captivity, but alive. The sky hunters circled above, wings slicing through the neon-lit storm, but for now, they held their distance. Kale's visor reflected the shifting light of the plasma currents, the fractured colors of the nebula, and the distant forms of the predators, a kaleidoscope of danger and beauty. Syrah's voice carried faintly from below, urgent but full of relief. Kale adjusted his tether, preparing for the final descent to the child and the safety of the plateau where gravity was more stable. Every movement still required calculation, but the worst of the nest's traps was behind them. Aura's wings flared tentatively, brushing against Kale's armor in a gesture of tentative trust. He allowed himself a momentary pause, feeling the exhaustion in his muscles, the strain in his chest. The descent resumed, slow and deliberate. Gravity currents twisted unpredictably, but Kale had learned their rhythm, anticipating shifts before they occurred. Plasma threads hissed and flared as residual energy from the nest reacted to their passage. The sky hunters called out, their cries bouncing against the canyon walls, but none approached close enough to strike. Inch by inch, step by careful step, Kale guided Aura toward the plateau where Syrah waited. Finally, they reached solid ground, the gravitational flux diminished, the wind calmer but still charged with metallic tang. Kale lowered Aura gently, checking her condition, and then looked down at the small figure of Syrah. Relief and hope radiated from her, reflected in the pulsing glow of her skin. Kale exhaled, feeling the tension in his body unwind slightly, though every sense remained alert. The sky hunters circled above, still dangerous, still predators of a world that refused to forgive weakness. But for this moment, they were beaten back by determination, precision, and the will of a human born on worlds meant to kill. Kale straightened, scanning the horizon, knowing the storm was not over, but also understanding that survival had been carved from chaos itself. One step at a time, breath by breath, they had crossed the abyss, and the legend of the Deathworld-born was taking shape in the shadows of Voron 9. He looked at Aura and Syrah, at the turbulent sky above, and felt a quiet, fragile victory. The canyon was alive, the predators still circling, but they were alive too, and for now, that was enough. The journey was far from over, but Kale had learned something vital on this fractured, hostile world. Survival demanded more than strength, it demanded calculation, courage, and the willingness to face impossible odds for those who could not fight for themselves. Every heartbeat echoed in the canyon like a drum, marking the rhythm of life, danger, and the delicate promise of hope in a world built to extinguish it. The plateau stretched beneath Kale's feet like a fragile island suspended above the abyss, a narrow strip of stability in a canyon that refused to rest. The plasma current still hissed softly, and distant sky hunters wheeled overhead, their metallic wings catching fractured nebula light in sharp, glinting arcs. But here, for the first time in hours, or perhaps days, time stretched strangely under Voron 9's gravitic flux, there was space to breathe. Aura and Syrah stood close together, wings partially extended, still trembling but alive. Kale lowered himself onto a patch of solid rock, feeling the exosuit shudder as it released its overtaxed servos from constant strain. Aura's wings flexed experimentally, bioluminescence flaring in rhythmic pulses. Kale watched her carefully, noting the subtle tremors in her muscles, the rapid cadence of her heart, and the faint tremor of her voice as she spoke words he could not translate. The translator implant captured fragments, and what it could interpret was a mixture of relief, gratitude, and quiet awe. Syrah pressed close, small hands gripping Kale's forearm, and whispered in her native tongue, repeating a phrase that roughly translated as, "You are from the world of death, yet life follows in your steps." The weight of that sentiment settled in Kale's chest. He had fought against impossible odds not for recognition, not for reward, but because a child's plea had pierced through his exhaustion and disillusionment. Across the canyon, the sky hunters lingered, circling, evaluating, their cries echoing against jagged cliffs. Their intelligence was not ordinary, they adapted, learned, calculated, but they had been denied the prey they had claimed for centuries. Kale's presence, a human hardened by death worlds, had changed the equation entirely. He took a step forward, leading Aura and Syrah toward a more stable ridge where the wind's fury was weaker and the ground more secure. Each step was careful, measured, as residual gravitational anomalies pulsed beneath the rock. Sparks from the exosuit lit the path in fractured neon, illuminating the jagged edges and alien debris scattered across the plateau. Kale felt every vibration, every micro-shift, and adjusted instinctively. Aura followed without hesitation, trusting his rhythm implicitly. Syrah's small figure darted ahead to scout, her luminous eyes scanning the horizon, signaling when the next stretch was safe. Eventually, they reached a natural landing zone, a broad platform where the canyon's instability diminished, and the plasma currents were faint and harmless. Kale released Aura's arm, allowing her to flex her wings fully. She lifted slightly, testing her strength, then turned to Syrah. Their reunion was silent yet profound, communicated through gestures, the pulsing glow of their veins, and the soft hum of bioluminescence. Kale watched, aware that he had become a bridge between two worlds, the human world of harsh survival and the alien realm of instinctive flight and fragile hope. From above, a faint resonance vibrated through the cliffs. The sky hunters had not abandoned the territory, but their pattern had shifted. They circled higher now, less aggressive, more cautious, their intelligence recognizing the anomaly that Kale represented. A human, Deathworld-born, capable of surviving environments no one else could, and of moving through their nest with precision that bordered on instinctive genius. The predator's cries were no longer purely threats, they were acknowledgments, the first measure of respect in a galaxy ruled by predation. Kale lowered his hood, brushing dust from his armor, and finally allowed himself to breathe fully. His body ached, muscles screaming from the constant adaptation to chaotic gravity and plasma currents, but a sense of completion settled over him. Syrah approached cautiously, her small hand resting on his forearm, and then Aura extended a wing to touch him, a gesture of trust, recognition, and gratitude. The translator picked up the meaning of her tone, "You carried life through the storm." Hours later, when the temporary calm settled over the plateau, Aura and Syrah prepared to depart. A small Lethari transport, its wings glowing faintly, descended from the higher strata, activated by bioluminescent synchronization with Aura's species. Kale watched as the mother and child moved toward it, each step coordinated, precise, yet carrying the weight of their ordeal. The ship's anti-gravity field activated, gently lifting them off the plateau, carrying them toward safer worlds, toward survival and recovery. Kale remained on the plateau, watching as the transport rose into the fractured light of the nebula. He had no illusions about the dangers that still surrounded him. The sky hunters still patrolled, the canyon's gravity fields remained unstable, but for the first time, he felt the calm certainty of a mission completed. His pulse slowed, and the canyon seemed to settle around him, the plasma currents dimming as though acknowledging that balance had been temporarily restored. He exhaled and stepped to the edge, looking out over the fractured landscape. The nebula's colors shimmered, fractured light painting the canyon walls in jagged beauty. Every peak, every ledge, every plasma-lit fracture had tested him, had pushed him to the limits of human instinct and endurance. Yet here he stood, alive, marked by the ordeal but unbroken. Somewhere across the galaxy, the story of the Deathworld-born human climbing the storm-tossed cliffs of Voron 9 to rescue a child's mother would spread, legends whispered among travelers, a tale of courage, precision, and an unyielding will to act when others could not. Kale took one final survey of the plateau, adjusting his suit, scanning for residual threats. The canyon remained alive, still shifting, still dangerous, yet he had mastered it for now, had imposed a human rhythm on the chaos. He allowed himself a small, grim smile. Survival was not an abstract concept here, it was tangible, earned inch by precarious inch, pulse by pulse, decision by decision. As the nebula's fractured light shifted, Kale turned, beginning his own descent from the plateau. He would leave Voron 9, but the canyon storm, the sky hunters, and the lives he had saved would remain indelibly etched in memory. For a moment, he allowed the weight of what had been accomplished to settle fully. He was a human, Deathworld-born, capable of traversing worlds built to destroy, and through that, he had forged not only survival but connection, a bridge between species, between worlds, and between chaos and order. The canyon whispered around him, a living presence aware of its new equilibrium. Kale exhaled once more, adjusting his grip and moving forward into the fractured horizon. The galaxy would remember this night, the child's plea, and the human who climbed the impossible, and somewhere, deep in the rhythm of stars and storms, he would carry the quiet certainty that in worlds meant to kill, life could still endure, and even thrive, through courage, precision, and unyielding determination.